I'm a serial killer. I was a serial killer. How would you even introduce that in a conversation? Do I still have to say I am a serial killer? Even if I haven't killed anyone in a while? Can I say I was a serial killer? Because technically, I still am a serial killer. I've killed multiple people, and I'm pretty sure that classifies me as a serial killer. So am I, or was I? Someone let me know. Anyways, yes, I am a serial killer, but not anyone famous like Jack the Ripper, or the Zodiac Killer, or the Vampire of Sacramento, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Charles Manson. Although, I suppose Manson was just a lunatic, and not exactly a serial killer per se. I'm dormant now. Anyhow, I haven't killed in a while, and I never got caught. Sometimes I do wonder though, if I started killing again, would they classify me as a copycat at first? And if so, how long would it take them to realize that I'm back? I'm getting off track here. I'm not writing this to tell you about myself. I'm not that stupid. I'm writing this to tell you about the people who I have killed. I don't know if that's more stupid than telling you about myself, but hey, I guess we'll find out soon. I just feel like I need to tell someone, and this isn't exactly something that you could bring up on a Tinder date, you know? I mean, could you imagine what would happen if you were sitting down, having dinner with someone, and you started telling them about how you murdered their mother? Yeah, not good. I suppose I've rambled on long enough, so here we go. I'm going to tell you about my first murder, my first victim, my mother. So sit back, grab a blanket, maybe some popcorn or wine, and enjoy. My mother's name was Grace. She was a beautiful woman. Even as a child, I thought my mother should be a princess in some faraway land, living in a castle surrounded by jewels and wealth. My father was somewhat out of the picture. He and my mother had separated when my mother realized she liked women instead of men. My father took it fairly well and ended up marrying again, a woman named Agnes. She wasn't as beautiful as my mother though, and I know he knew. I lived with my mother for a few years, and then my mother began dating a woman named Annika, and she moved into our house with us. Annika was nice and kind, and also rather beautiful. She didn't force me to try to have a relationship with her or anything, which I think is what made it easy for me to get along with her. She was like a friend. Grace and Annika got married after dating for about 2.5 years, and they were happy. For a while at least. Turns out, Annika only wanted my mother's money. When my grandparents died, they left all of their estate to my mother, and they were rather very wealthy. After Annika and my mother had been married for 8 months, Annika emptied out most of the money in my college fund and just completely ran off. My mother was mortified. I was angry. I was angry at Annika, but also at my mother, though I don't know why. My mother didn't do anything. She had been robbed, and the love of her life had just left her. She became depressed and started drinking. Soon our neat, cookie-cutter house became a dumpster for beer bottles, weed, and cocaine. I had to drop out of school and get a job to raise myself after that, and I resented Grace for it. She was no longer my mother, just Grace. It angered me that she was robbing me of my youth by making me take care of her while she stayed home, snorting cocaine like her life depended on it, and using beer as a chaser for her vodka. That's when I started thinking of ways to kill her. It was simple. Killing an addict always is. Got a heroin addict? Shoot them up with a lethal dose, and no one will think twice about it. Alcoholic? Just pour alcohol down their throat until they die of alcohol poisoning. But I really didn't want to do any of that. I didn't want it to be so simple. So instead, I gave her some sleeping pills and alcohol to knock her out. Then I strapped her down to the kitchen table, took a hatchet, and hacked off all of her limbs. I started with her feet actually, and at first, it was quite the task. After the second foot, however, it all sort of melted into one swift movement, and before I knew it, her hands, feet, calves, arms, thighs, torso, and head were all on the floor, and there was blood everywhere, and bones slightly sticking up out of random body parts. I put all of the parts in a black garbage bag, and then put that bag into a second bag to ensure that no blood would spill out. Then I got an idea. I took the head back out of the bag, and spent about an hour taking all of Grace's teeth out, one by one. Then I mutilated her face to make it harder to identify her if someone happened to stumble across her body. I broke all of her teeth and put them in a bottle, and then went to work on cleaning all of the blood. I didn't clean the entire house, however. That looks too suspicious. Instead, I cleaned up all of the blood, and then threw some bottles and cigarettes around, making it a mess again. 2 days later, I told my boss I was going camping on the west side of the woods, and I took off in the opposite direction. Then I dug a deep hole, deep, not wide, and I put her body in there. After I was done, I looked around for a dead bird. I didn't find one, so I ended up having to kill one for myself, and before I fully covered the hole, I threw the bird in at the top and covered it up. After that, I drove back down to the west side of town and made sure that people saw me setting up camp and fishing. When I went back home the next day, I called the police and told them my mother was missing. They never found anything. Hello, and welcome back to my memoir of complete death. I'm back with another story about how I killed someone else a while back. In my last post, I received a few comments about how I should have killed Annika. Well, be careful what you wish for, because here we are. Before I go on to the story, however, I would like to acknowledge a comment I received on my last post about why I did not destroy Grace's fingerprints, but did ruin her face and teeth. The answer is rather simple, really. I was an amateur. It was my first kill, and I was nervous. So give me a break. We all make mistakes. Annika Jones was a hard woman to track down, which I suppose is a good thing to be when you marry people and steal their money. I searched her name, different spellings of her name, but nothing would come up. I couldn't exactly ask someone to help me either, since my intention was to kill her, and it would look rather suspicious if word got out that I had been tracking her down in the moments before her death. I also didn't want to have to kill whoever helped me find her, as I didn't want any innocent bodies piling up, because that's what you need to understand. None of my victims were innocent. One way or another, they were all guilty of something. Anyway, it took me about 3 months to find her, and I won't bore you with all the searches and details on how I found her exactly. She was careful, but not careful enough, and her fake identity was rather laughable, and a brain-dead lab rat could have come up with something better than Lola Annika Monnier, which is her first and middle names flipped around, with Grace's pre-divorce last name added in. I figured that she was actually quite stupid after seeing that. Anyway, she was still in town, living up in the richer neighborhoods. I drove up there and parked a few miles away from her actual property. All the houses that I had passed on my way made me sick. They were unnecessarily huge, and Annika's was no exception. Her house was white and pristine. It was almost like birds didn't even shit up here. Her yard was green, and the grass was mowed so neatly that it had looked like a painting. I walked up to the sidewalk, which was the cleanest sidewalk I had ever seen in my life, and onto her porch. When I knocked on her door, her face was priceless. You would have thought that she had seen God himself standing on her front porch, here to kick her down to hell for stealing. Her curly hair was shiny now, no longer frizzy and unruly, and she was wearing my week's salary on her left ring finger. Her house was huge. About 2 of my house would fit in that place. There was a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, and I could see a chandelier hanging from the roof behind her. I wondered what poor person she was stealing from now. "Hello, Annika," I said, sticking my hands in my coat pockets as she stared at me in shock. Hello, Landon," she whispered. Whenever I think about that meeting, I realize that she must have been rather scared, considering that her dark skin began to look rather pale, and I thought she might die of fright. Which I was sort of worried about, because then I wouldn't have the joy of killing her as I planned. "Can I come in?" I asked her. "No," I stared at her. "You took all of my money, and you're not even gonna let me in your house?" I asked. "I didn't take your money," she said. Her voice shook. This angered me. Sure, the stealing was pretty shitty, and she turned my mother into a worthless addict and made me kill her. But come on, lying? That's what really bothered me. I pushed past her and stepped into her house, shutting the door behind me. "My mother is dead," I said to her. She gulped and wrapped her arms around herself. I thought she was just missing," she replied. "She's dead. That's because I killed her," I replied. Annika started crying. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you won't tell," I replied. I stepped closer to her, and she cried even louder, which was starting to piss me off. "You won't tell because I'm here to kill you," I replied. Annika wailed and I rolled my eyes. This woman was so dramatic. I reached out and grabbed her arm, and she screamed and attempted to run from me. So I had to bang her head against a very expensive-looking table until she was out completely cold. I stared at her, laying on her expensive tile, in her expensive house, with her expensive jewelry and her expensive clothes. It was disgusting and unfair. It made me angry. I leaned down and wrapped one of her expensively polished curls around one of my fingers. Next, I walked out to my car and grabbed a jug of gasoline. Before anyone points out any other mistakes, I should mention that I was, in fact, wearing gloves. Next, I took the handle of the jug and took Annika's limp hand and wrapped it around the handle and touched it to a few other parts of the jug. No fingerprints make things a bit more suspicious. When I was done with that, I took out 3 syringes full of insulin that I had in my pocket and injected them into her hairline. People don't really check hairlines for needle injections, which is rather stupid if you ask me, but also makes my work a bit easier. Then I grabbed the jug again and covered her body in gasoline, then the floor around her and her ridiculously expensive house decor. This bitch was living in a fucking fairy tale, and she didn't deserve that. I took a match and lit it, then let it fall out of my hand and stood in the doorway of the house, watching it as it all caught on fire and lit all of her expensive shit on fire. I wanted to stand there and watch Annika burn, but I couldn't risk someone seeing the smoke and then seeing me. After all, it was only my second kill, and it would have been a shame to get caught so quickly. So instead, I shut the door and walked back to my car and drove away. You know what's nice about richer neighborhoods? Everyone wants their privacy, which means they pay for a lot of land and larger property. This also means that the houses are set pretty far apart from each other in this area, a couple of miles at least, which also means that there are no witnesses to something like setting some bitch's house on fire. Now, isn't that nice?